Legal battle brewing, pun intended, between Tim Hortons and some of its Quebec franchisees. More than a dozen Quebec franchise owners have sued the company, arguing that rising costs and corporate decisions have made it increasingly difficult to turn a profit. Tim Hortons now filing in Quebec Superior Court their statement of defense. Let's dive into this lawsuit with Susan Krashinsky Robertson. She's been all over this story with The Globe and Mail. Susan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
In a nutshell, what is all of this legal battle? What is it all about?
Well, basically, it's a disagreement between the restaurant owners and the chain that they operate restaurants under. This is about sort of the structure of the franchisee business. When you go into a Tim Hortons, even though it's a very big brand, it's often run by a small business owner. That's the franchisee who owns that restaurant and who makes their living based on its operations. And so even though these owners are responsible for running their restaurants, there's a lot that their franchise company controls. And that's what this dispute is about. The franchise owners are saying that Tim Hortons basically rose or increased the cost of many of their supplies, which the company will either sell directly to its restaurant owners or negotiate supplier relationships for them. But that at the same time, the menu prices, which the company also controls, didn't go up enough. And essentially the difference in what you pay for all your supplies and what you can sell your products for is the heart of business. It's what determines your profit margins. And they say their profits were really eroded by collectively among these 15 franchisees, they say millions of dollars over a few years.
And I can see the argument, right? If Tim Hortons is in charge of pricing, but they're also in charge in many respects as to what you're paying for your supplies, I could see where the squeeze could come. What's the defense from the company that they filed?
So Tim Hortons' defense basically says that, no, in fact, we did raise menu prices. And this is the kind of thing, it's really interesting because it's the kind of thing that companies don't usually publicize. And so this lawsuit actually gives us a little lens into something that we don't usually get to see, like how a company makes decisions about what you pay for your morning double-double, for example. And so in this case, they're actually saying, well, no, hang on a second. Yes, obviously, the period of this lawsuit, it covers a time we all remember when there was skyrocketing inflation in Canada, particularly in the cost of food, around 2021, 2022. And so, they acknowledge, yes, costs went up, but that also during that time, they say they did raise prices. And actually, this document gives us an eye into how Tim Hortons sets prices across Canada. They have 62 regional clusters that basically in every place, they'll look at what competitors are doing in that market to sort of compare their prices. They'll do sometimes live testing to see what customers will bear in terms of price increases. And their defense is that overall in Quebec, from 2021 to 2024, they said they increased menu prices by about 21%. That's a pretty big jump. And so their point is, no, menu prices did go up, and we have helped our franchisees here. But that, they say that essentially this is on them for not running their restaurants well enough. That's essentially the sort of crux of their defense.
And of course, it's an incredibly competitive market, right? There's so much competition for that coffee dollar, that sandwich dollar in this country of all the quick service chains. So there's that side of it as well. I imagine, how much can you raise prices given a very competitive industry?
Absolutely. And they'll look at that really closely. In fact, I mentioned those 62 clusters. That's just how granular they get. And they know basically that they can't charge the same for a cup of coffee in downtown Montreal that they can charge in the Montérégie, for example. So they're looking at this in a really, really scientific, really close way. And what they say is, they did raise those prices, as I mentioned, but they were ahead of inflation in those menu price increases, but behind the restaurant industry. And this is another thing they watch really closely. They say in their court documents, they reveal that, they watch to see how competitors compare to them in terms of customer perceptions of value. So it's not just about the price, it's about whether you, walking into a Tim Hortons, feel like you're getting a good deal. And they say they were pretty successful in balancing out these price increases, which they had to implement as the cost of goods went up, with perceptions of affordability. They even quote in their court document some research that competitor restaurants face criticism for opportunistic price increases during periods of high inflation. that Tim Hortons escaped. So you can see just how closely they're watching this when they're making these decisions.
Talking Tim Hortons with Susan Krashinsky Robertson, business reporter over at the Globe and Mail. So, Susan, where do you think this lawsuit ends up? There's always settlements. Sometimes you get to court, but you don't go through all the way. How do you think this plays out? Are these two groups that are bitter here and just going to stick it to the end?
It's a really good question. It's hard to know sort of the future. Sometimes there are settlements in cases like this. Sometimes people just decide to, if they're not happy with a system that they're working within, they sometimes decide to cut their losses and they'll hand back the keys to their restaurants. But it's unclear where this is going from here. What we do know is that it took about 2 years, actually, for Tim Hortons to file its statement of defense, partly because in Quebec, lawsuits work a little bit differently. Lawyers will do examinations before they actually file their statement of defense. So there's been quite a lot of sort of depositions, essentially, that have gone on before this happened. And so now, essentially, what Tim Hortons is asking for is they've called this lawsuit abusive. They've said it has absolutely no merit. They're asking the court to throw it out. And they could eventually, if they're successful in that request, they could eventually ask for damages. They've asked to reserve the right to later on ask for damages, including their court costs and even maybe punitive damages against these franchisees that have sued them. And so, this is quite a public fight and something where they are also hitting back. The franchisees themselves, according to the court document, have asked for about $27 million in damages, at least at this point. But this is also kind of a rolling process where, the franchisees have said that as this thing has wended its way through the courts, they've continued to have losses. And so they've continued to claim that as damages as this has gone on. So the fight is definitely not over at this point.
It can't be the way either a restaurant and franchisees, can't be the relationship either side wants with the other side when you're trying to operate a successful quick service enterprise. Susan, before I let you go, I just want to talk about the other challenges that Tim Hortons faces, okay? We had Duncan Fulton on the program just a couple of weeks ago. He's the chief corporate officer of Restaurant Brands International, Tim Hortons here. He came on the program to talk about the big changes that Tim Hortons was touting a couple of weeks ago on the foreign worker front, on new stores, revitalized stores. Have a listen to some of what he told us about the use of the foreign workers program.
Yeah, and it is trending down. So our owners' use of the program has dropped by half in the last year and a half. We know there's youth unemployment at 14%. I will say youth is not the total solution to Tim Hortons. Yeah. So, people go through drive-thrus and they sometimes say, "Where are the kids?" Just remember, 60% of our business is between 5 a.m. and 11 a.m. when students are waking up and going to school.
So, Susan, to wrap up here, I just want to know your take on how you think Tim Hortons is navigating the other aspects, the other pressures of running their business in Canada. Clearly, they've been responding to the Dunkin' Donuts impending threat with a couple of their decisions. How do you see it?
Yeah, the Dunkin' thing is an interesting move, obviously, particularly actually in Quebec, where I think a lot of people have pretty good memories of when Dunkin' was a much more powerful brand there before it exited the market. And so, there's an opportunity certainly there for the Montreal-based franchisor that has decided to launch Dunkin' back into the Canadian market. I think that there's always been competitive pressure on Tim Hortons. They face pressure on the coffee front and the breakfast front from McDonald's, one of the largest and most sophisticated quick service restaurant chains in the world. They face pressure from other chains. They've also talked about openly needing to improve their franchisees' profitability. That even though they've hit back against this lawsuit, they have talked about the fact that they've needed to improve the restaurant owners' profitability, and that's a constant work. They have had some improvements in recent years, but they still haven't gotten back for Tim Hortons to where they were in 2018. And so there's a lot of things for them to navigate on this front. The temporary foreign worker announcement was obviously very interesting. It was a stark reversal, in Tim Hortons' previous position. They were one of the biggest proponents of the temporary foreign worker program, and in filling their restaurants with staff through that program. So it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate that. But all in all, this is a company that has done a lot of work to improve Tim Hortons' operations over the years, and they've had quite a lot of success with that. Tim Hortons has been trending up in terms of sales, and they have seen their franchisees' profits improve. So I think what they're trying to do here is to really emphasize that this fight that they're having right now, which has echoes of previous fights that they've had with franchisees in the past, they're really trying to push the message that these are 15 franchisees. They've got 300 franchisees total in Quebec, hundreds more across the country. And they're saying this is really one small targeted fight that does not actually represent what's happening chain-wide for us. That would be sort of, I think, what they would say about this.
Susan, you're great. You come back anytime, okay?
Thanks so much.
You can read Susan Krashinsky's Robertson's words in the Globe and Mail. When we return on the Elias Macko Show, new poll out this morning shows an incredibly tight race in Quebec politics. We'll get you the details.
The newest tracks. Let's go. New music. And the next big thing.
Always on the new music first.
Your first place to hear it all.
'Cause you gon' like it, love it, wanna play it twice. Playing now.
iHeart New Music. Your digital station for brand new drops, fresh finds, and tomorrow's bangers.
I think we need something new.
Discover iHeart New Music. Always fresh, always first. Stream now on the free iHeartRadio app.